afternoon. I am Pastor Terry from Tuscola United Methodist Church, and today is our first full day in self-imposed isolation. And so what I want to do is try to post a video every day so that we can keep in contact and that we can continue to have Christian fellowship, even if it's in our own homes. So today's video, I think, is pretty interesting because it explains how I believe that God exists. So strap yourself in because it's not going to go the direction you think it's going to go. So why do I think that God exists? I think we can find this out in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus? Yeah, that book that no one ever likes to read because it is a deadly dull rule book. It's like reading, no offense, United Methodists out there, but it's kind of like reading our own book of discipline. Not always the most interesting read in the world, but has some very important information. So how do I believe Leviticus teaches us that God exists? Well, strap in with me. Let's use our imaginations. Let's imagine that time travel has been invented, and the first person to use time travel is an average Bronze Age human being, someone who would have been alive back in the Moses time period. And this person is suddenly here in modern times. Can you imagine how much they would be stressed at looking around and seeing the world that we've created, looking outside and seeing cars and airplanes and even bicycles would blow their minds. And now let's talk about healthcare. Explain to them about heart bypasses and transplants and how we're all built up of cells and some of the most dangerous things in the world are these tiny, tiny bacteria and viruses that you can't even see. They would never be able to process it. I can't even process it most of the time, and I live in modern times. So how did God choose to explain to these people how to stay healthy? He chose to do it by creating purity laws. So listen to this one. God says in Exodus 15:26, if you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right and follow his commandments and keep his statutes, I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians. Oh, so God is telling us from the very beginning, hey, I'm going to keep you as healthy as I possibly can by explaining to you ways to combat diseases. So let's take a look at how this happens. First, let's look at the part of Leviticus that most people are aware of, and that is the dietary guidelines. So for example, you were allowed to eat animals that ate grass. Herbivores, the kinds of animals that we still eat today. Those kinds of animals were considered safer. The animals you shouldn't eat were carnivores, and most specifically scavenging carnivores, the kind of animals that would be full of bacteria. They ate rotting meat to survive. This is not a way for us to keep healthy. We all know this, but it goes a little further. There's actually more advice that God gives us than just about meat. Here's one most people don't know. In Leviticus 3:17, God tells us not to eat fat. What? So God was telling people long before they understood what cholesterol was and what heart blockages and strokes were, God was telling them, hey, don't eat a lot of fat. And God couched it as saying, hey, the fat is for the Lord your God. But God is explaining that eating too much animal fat is not good for you. There's other things God explained, such as what does constitute a healthy diet. Instead of just making your bread from regular old flour, God says in Ezekiel 4:9 that you should make bread from wheat and barley, beans and lentils, millet and spelt. What is that? That is complex carbohydrates. And most doctors will tell you, yes, you should get your complex carbohydrates and your fiber. This kind of diet was going to provide sustained, healthy energy for people who did a lot of physical labor. It goes on. Here's one that I hate, but it is true. Proverbs 25:16 tells us that if you find a lot of honey, don't eat it all. Eat of it sparingly. Hey, guess what? Too much sugar. Not good for you. And in Proverbs 28:7, God warns us against gluttony. God is saying from the very beginning, there is a relationship between the food you eat and your health. That is amazing to me. That is so amazing that God understood all of this and found a way to explain it to a people who had no idea what constituted health. Now, as for the spread of diseases, God had lots of other rules. One of the big rules was what you could touch. Now, most of us have heard you can't touch a dead body, right? We know this, but there's other things you can't touch. One of them is fungus. Well, that seems very odd, but think about how dangerous we now know black mold is. If you live in a house that has black mold, you are in a toxic environment. And God is saying, hey, if you come into contact with these things, dead bodies, dead animals, mold, funguses, wash thoroughly afterwards so as to stay healthier. Now, here's another one, and a lot of people have found this to be sexist, but I'm going to look at the good side of this. After women gave birth, they were considered to be unclean. And to touch a woman who gave birth, and after you touched a woman who gave birth, you were supposed to wash thoroughly. Now, think about what this would have meant for a midwife who is delivering a baby, who is going to constantly be washing her hands and therefore not spreading bacteria that cause childbirth fever. This is something that has killed an untold amount of women and newborns throughout history. And God is saying from the very beginning, listen, just follow these guidelines and you're not going to suffer in that way. But of course, other cultures in this timeline would have had similar guidelines, right? This isn't proof of God's existence. Well, actually, they didn't. A lot of them had medical recommendations for how to cure diseases, but none of the others focused on preventing the spread of diseases, upon living a healthy lifestyle from the very beginning. In fact, medical historian Ralph Major describes Moses as the greatest sanitary engineer the world has ever seen. And how did Moses get all of this information? Through our God that loves us so much that God created a comprehensive health law to keep us from getting sick from the very beginning. So, as we ride out this coronavirus pandemic, I want us to remember that we have a God who cares for our health and for our cleanliness. I want you to remember that God set it up that the only way we could approach God was by being clean. As Moses shows us in Exodus 40, verses 30 through 32, he set the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar and put water in it for washing, with which Moses and Aaron and his sons washed their hands and their feet when they went into the tent of meeting, and when they approached the altar, they washed as the Lord had commanded. So wash your hands, y'all. So I would love to hear your thoughts on what I posted today. Let's keep in contact. Post a video, post a text, whatever you'd like to do. But let's share our thoughts today about how we can continue to keep ourselves safe and how we can trust in God to help us make wise decisions. I love you and miss you all, and I will hopefully see you soon. Bye-bye.